She wasn't supposed to be there that night. That's what they whispered as they walked past the motor pool, the place most avoided after hours. The smell of oil, the bite of welding sparks, the silence of machines waiting for dawn. But she was there, bent over a damaged armor plate, sleeves rolled up, sweat streaking her forehead, her torch hissing against steel like a restless serpent. A woman in her late 20s, nameless to most of the Marines on base, known only as the night mechanic. They thought that was all she was. Just someone who clocked in when the world slept, patched their vehicles, and vanished before sunrise. They didn't know her story, didn't ask. They didn't notice the way she checked every bolt twice, the way her eyes flicked to the shadows beyond the gate, or how her hands never shook even when the torch sputtered near failure. But one detail could have told them everything, if they had cared enough to look. A tattoo on her forearm, mostly hidden, black ink carved with deliberate precision, a wing outstretched in flame, 3 words curling beneath it like a command. Phoenix Talon, engage. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe that real heroes are often the ones overlooked, hit like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear deserves to be remembered. Her name was Maya Cross, and by the time the Marines figured out who she really was, it was already too late to laugh at the silence they once mistook for weakness. During the day, Maya was invisible. She slipped into the repair bay as the others filed out, their laughter echoing in the corridors, their boots pounding across the concrete toward food, friends, and beds waiting for them. She stayed behind, where the hum of fluorescent lights was her only company, where shadows stretched long across stacks of rusted tools and stripped-down engines. She wasn't one of them, not in their eyes. She didn't wear their uniform, didn't march in their drills. She was a civilian contractor, hired to keep their armor running, their Humvees rolling, their APCs ready for maneuvers at dawn. They called her Garage Girl, sometimes Miss Fix-It, and when they were feeling bold, wannabe soldier. She never replied. She just kept her head down, working through the night while the others slept off their bravado. That silence, they thought, was weakness. But silence has a way of storing thunder, waiting for the right storm. Every night was the same. Midnight struck, and Maya stood alone in the motor pool. She laid her tools out like a surgeon, every wrench, every gauge, every wire tester in its place. She wiped grease from her hands with a rag that had seen better years. And then she worked, her movements precise, practiced, not the fumbling of someone learning, but the calm execution of someone who had done this before, far more times, and in far darker places, than they would ever guess. The recruits mocked her behind her back. She probably couldn't tell a barrel from a tire if it wasn't labeled, one sneered. Another joked that the only combat she'd ever seen was fighting a coffee machine. The words carried easily through the thin walls of the bay, but Maya never flinched. If they looked closely, they might have noticed the notebook she kept in her back pocket, pages smudged with grease, filled with sketches of armor plating, wiring diagrams, and notes written in quick, blocky handwriting. They might have seen the edge of a name scribbled in the margins, one no one dared to utter out loud. Phoenix Talon. But no one looked closely. No one cared. Her world was metal and silence. She spoke to the machines when no one else was listening. She whispered to bolts as she tightened them, murmured to engines as she coaxed them back to life. She treated every repair as if it mattered, even the smallest scratch, the smallest misalignment. Because she knew what they didn't. That one broken seal, one faulty latch, could cost lives in the field. That armor wasn't just steel. It was the thin skin between breath and silence. Between a soldier returning home or becoming a name etched into stone. She had learned that lesson once, in fire and blood, and she never forgot it. But they didn't know that. They didn't know her age when she first carried a rifle, when she first felt the weight of command pressing against her spine. They didn't know the call sign whispered in her ear through headsets crackling with static, the one she carried not on her lips, but under her skin. Phoenix Talon, engage. They didn't know because she never told them. And so they mocked. They laughed at the quiet girl with the grease-stained sleeves, the one who never looked them in the eye. They saw her as background, part of the machinery, useful but forgettable. But Captain Reyes wasn't like the others. He noticed details. He noticed the way Maya checked armor seams with a soldier's caution, not a contractor's clock in efficiency. He noticed the way she carried herself, not hunched, not hurried, but with a strange balance, like someone who had walked in formation for years and couldn't quite forget it. He noticed her hands. Steady, unshaking, even when tools slipped and metal sparked. He noticed her tattoo. The first time, he thought it was coincidence. The second time, he knew better. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. He just watched. Because some stories reveal themselves in silence, not sound. What Maya never said, what she would never volunteer, was that she hadn't always been invisible. At 22, she had worn the same uniform the others now mocked her for lacking. She had stood where they stood, saluted where they saluted. She had been younger than most of them when the call came for Phoenix Talon, a rapid response strike team pulled together for missions so classified their names were erased from rosters before they even deployed. She was the youngest member, the one they doubted at first, the one who had to prove herself twice as hard for half the recognition. And she did. She proved it in silence, in endurance, in carrying her weight without complaint. Then came Black Sands, the operation no one survived, at least officially. Reports said the team was lost. But reports are just words. And Maya Cross, the mechanic they laughed at, carried the scars of that operation like shadows beneath her skin. Every night she worked the same way, methodical, relentless, unseen. And every night she walked home under the dim glow of security lights, her tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve once more. No one followed. No one asked. They didn't know that the ink wasn't just art, wasn't just a memory. It was a trigger, a command, a promise made in whispers to ghosts who never came home. A phrase burned into her skin so she could never forget. Phoenix Talon, engage. And on that night, past midnight, when Captain Reyes walked into the motor pool, when his eyes caught the black ink illuminated by the glow of a welding torch, the silence cracked. Because he knew. He had seen that tattoo once before, in a classified briefing years ago, attached to names spoken only in hushed tones. Names of warriors who shouldn't exist, who weren't supposed to have survived. But one had. She wasn't supposed to be here, repairing armor past midnight. But she was. And the moment his eyes locked onto that ink, history rose out of the shadows, and the night would never be ordinary again. Captain Reyes hadn't meant to stop by the motor pool that night. He was just coming off a long exercise, the kind that left nerves raw and tempers short. A stubborn troop carrier had jammed its rear armor plate during the maneuver, and he wanted to make sure it was fixed before the next morning's run. He expected to find the place empty, machines cooling under the hum of fluorescent lights. Instead, he found her, Maya Cross, alone, torch hissing, sparks raining like fireflies into the shadows. Her face was streaked with soot, her jaw set with the kind of concentration he had only ever seen on soldiers in combat, not civilians patching up steel. He lingered in the doorway, watching, as she knelt to steady the panel, sleeve riding up to her elbow. That's when he saw it. Black ink glinting under the harsh light, wings outstretched in flame, words curling like an order carried through smoke. Phoenix Talon, engage. His breath caught. He knew those words. Everyone who had ever served long enough in shadows knew them. But no one ever said them out loud. That phrase belonged to a unit spoken of in rumors, dismissed as myth, buried so deep in classified files that most officers assumed it was just a story to keep young Marines sharp. Except it wasn't. Reyes had once seen the file himself, years ago, back when he was a lieutenant assigned to logistics clearance. A strike team, rapid response, operating in black zones where no records were supposed to exist. Phoenix Talon. The motto, engage without hesitation. And next to the names on that file were photos, faded, grainy, but real. He remembered one. A young woman, barely older than a recruit, sharp eyes and a set jaw. He remembered because she looked out of place. Too young, too quiet, too alive in a file filled with ghosts. And now, years later, he was looking at her again, except she wasn't in combat gear. She was in oil-stained coveralls, her hair tied back, her hands steady on a machine they had all dismissed as mundane. For a long moment, he didn't move. The memory pressed against him like a weight, and he whispered the words without thinking, his voice caught between disbelief and awe. Phoenix Talon, engage. The sound was low, almost swallowed by the buzz of the torch, but she heard it. Maya froze. Her eyes shifted, just slightly. Then she shut off the torch with a sharp hiss. The silence after the spark died was heavier than any explosion. Slowly, she turned, meeting his gaze for the first time. No smile, no greeting, just eyes that had seen too much for someone her age. "I told them," she said, her voice calm but edged, never to use that phrase unless it was life or death. The words hit him harder than any reprimand, because they weren't casual words, weren't the shrug of someone amused at recognition. They were rules, directives, triggers. She was confirming it, without ceremony, without denial. The mechanic wasn't just a mechanic. She was one of them, one of the lost. Reyes took a step closer, his boots echoing across the concrete, and for the first time in years he felt like a young officer again, unsure, out of his depth. "It's you," he whispered, the disbelief still rough in his throat. "You're—" Maya cut him off, her gaze steady. "No, I was. Not anymore." She pulled the sleeve back down, covering the ink, and turned back toward the half-mended panel. Her hands moved again, calm, deliberate, as if welding steel were easier than facing the storm in his voice. But Reyes couldn't look away. Every rumor he'd heard, every whispered story in the barracks about Phoenix Talon, about missions that went wrong, about soldiers who never came home, suddenly had a face, right here, working in silence while everyone else slept. He remembered Black Sands, the mission that had ended them. The official word was annihilation. No survivors. A black flag operation no one would ever acknowledge. But standing there, he realized the truth. One had walked away, and she had chosen not to speak of it, chosen to disappear into grease and shadows, carrying ghosts in silence. The weight of it pressed into him, and for a long moment he didn't know what to say. Finally, he managed. "Why here? Why this?" She didn't look up. "Because metal doesn't lie. It either holds, or it breaks. People," she trailed off, her torch sparking back to life. "People pretend." The sparks flew again, lighting the ink beneath her sleeve for just a heartbeat, as if the past itself refused to stay hidden. Reyes stood there, rooted in the doorway, the truth burning itself into him. The recruits who joked about her, the officers who dismissed her, none of them had a clue who walked among them. But he did now, and he understood, with a clarity that shook him, that the silence around Maya Cross wasn't emptiness. It was waiting, a storm coiled tight, quiet until the moment it was needed. And he knew, with the kind of certainty that comes only from war, that when the day came, when the words were finally spoken with intent, Phoenix Talon would engage again. Dawn broke sharp and cold, the kind of morning that scraped against the skin and made every breath sting. The motor pool looked the same as it always did, rows of armored vehicles standing silent like watchmen, their steel frames glistening with dew. But the air was different. Word had moved through the barracks in whispers, carried on rumor the way fire crawls through dry grass. The garage girl wasn't just a mechanic. She wasn't just the quiet contractor who worked past midnight and avoided the spotlight. She had a name that made old veterans stiffen and young recruits blink in disbelief. Maya Cross, Phoenix Talon, the unit every Marine had heard of, but none had ever expected to meet. By the time Captain Reyes called formation in the courtyard, no one dared be late. Rows of recruits snapped into place, boots aligned, eyes forward, though curiosity flickered in their expressions. Even the officers who usually strolled in with lazy confidence stood straighter, uneasy without knowing why. They didn't have to wait long. Reyes stepped forward, his voice carrying with the precision of command, but laced with something different this time: respect. "You think you know who keeps you safe," he began, his eyes scanning the young faces. "You think it's the stripes on your sleeve, the rifles in your hands, the drills you complain about before dawn." His voice hardened. "But what if I told you that while you were laughing at someone who didn't march with you, someone who wore no rank and asked for no recognition, she was the reason half of you even have a base to stand on?" A ripple of unease moved through the ranks. Reyes let the silence stretch, then turned toward the motor pool doors. They opened slowly, and Maya stepped into the light. She wasn't in dress uniform. She wasn't polished for ceremony. She wore the same oil-stained coveralls, a rag tucked into her pocket, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. But every eye locked on her as though she carried medals across her chest. She didn't march. She didn't salute. She just walked forward, steady, unhurried, until she stood beside Reyes. The recruits shifted, 1,000 unspoken questions hanging in the air. Reyes didn't make them wait. He raised his hand, and pointed to the black ink barely visible on her arm. Some of you saw it last night. Most of you ignored it. That mark is not decoration. It is not a story. It is the symbol of Phoenix Talon. A collective breath sucked the air from the courtyard. A few of the older officers stiffened visibly, the name hitting them like a forgotten ghost returning to life. Reyes's voice cut sharper now, every word deliberate. Phoenix Talon wasn't a myth. It wasn't a rumor. It was real, and this woman carried it. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. When we say engage, we mean follow her. The silence was complete now. Even the flag overhead seemed to hang heavier in the still air. Maya looked out at them, rows of young Marines who had mocked her, dismissed her, ignored her existence. Her eyes didn't accuse. They didn't demand apology. They just held the kind of stillness that made even the cockiest recruit straighten his back. Slowly, almost uncertainly at first, a hand lifted in salute. Then another. Then a third. Until every Marine in the courtyard stood rigid, hands raised, offering the one thing she had never asked for, but had always earned. Respect. For the first time since Black Sands, Maya didn't look away. She gave a single, small nod, the kind that acknowledged without claiming, the kind that said, "I see you, and now you see me." Reyes turned back to them, his voice steady. "You've been told that leadership comes from rank, from orders shouted loud enough to make the walls shake. But the truth is standing beside me. Leadership is silence. It's patience. It's knowing what matters when the noise fades." He looked at Maya, then back to his Marines. "Remember her face. Remember her name. Because one day, when the world asks more of you than you think you can give, you'll understand why the words were carved into her skin." Phoenix Talon, engage. Maya didn't stay for speeches. She didn't want applause. When Reyes finished, she stepped back, her boots carrying her toward the motor pool once more. But the courtyard had changed. Every pair of eyes followed her, not with mockery this time, but with reverence. Every salute that dropped as she passed did so with weight. By the time she disappeared back into the shadows of the bay, no one dared call her garage girl again. From that morning on, when her name was spoken, it carried something different. Not legend, not myth, but truth. And that was how silence broke. Not with fireworks, not with a headline, but with a tattoo revealed under the midnight hum of a welding torch, with 3 words whispered into the right ears at the right time. Phoenix Talon, engage. The phrase that once marked the dead now lived again in the eyes of every Marine who saluted her first. And no, Maya Cross would never ask for it. She had reclaimed something greater than medals or memory. She had reclaimed respect.